There are things Canadians do that are so quiet, so subtle, so natural, you would never notice them unless you slowed down long enough to see what's really happening. Not the stereotypes, not the obvious politeness, but the tiny behaviors hidden between ordinary moments, the ones that reveal how Canada truly works beneath the surface. Canada is one of the few places where the most interesting cultural habits don't happen loudly. They happen silently, in the background of everyday life. Canadians communicate in small gestures, soft movements, and tiny decisions that shape the entire atmosphere around them. You won't see arguments in grocery stores, you won't hear aggressive tones in public, and you won't feel crowded even in busy areas. Instead, you notice space. Space between people, space in conversations, space in social interactions. Canadians don't announce their culture, they express it through restraint, through how they move, how they listen, and how they adjust themselves so the world around them stays comfortable. These behaviors don't demand attention, which is why most visitors miss them entirely. But once you start noticing them, they reveal an entire layer of Canadian life that rarely gets talked about. One of the quietest but most powerful habits Canadians have is their instinctive respect for personal boundaries. Not just physical boundaries, emotional ones too. A Canadian won't ask you overly personal questions, won't interrupt your thoughts, and won't force their opinion into a conversation. They leave pauses so you can finish speaking. They stand at a distance that feels comfortable, not suffocating. Even on busy sidewalks, Canadians naturally shift their bodies to avoid coming too close to strangers. They line up with almost mathematical spacing, not because they're told to, but because it's an unspoken cultural expectation. They don't lean in. They don't hover. They don't squeeze past you without acknowledging your presence. And they certainly don't create unnecessary tension. This quiet respect for boundaries builds a sense of safety that many people feel long before they understand why. There is a quiet rhythm to Canadian communication that most people never realize is happening. In Canada, the goal of a conversation isn't to dominate or prove a point, it's to keep the interaction comfortable for everyone involved. When Canadians speak, they instinctively smooth the edges of their sentences. A suggestion isn't a command. A disagreement isn't an argument. Even a complaint arrives wrapped in gentle language. They'll say, "It might be better if," instead of, "Here's what you should do." They'll say, "I'm not sure if this makes sense, but," even when what they're saying is perfectly reasonable. And when something bothers them, you won't hear anger. You'll hear subtle phrasing like, "not ideal," or "that's a bit much," which in Canadian terms is the emotional equivalent of shouting. Even their body language softens tension. They give a light smile to show good intentions. They nod to signal understanding. They lower their tone to show respect. They avoid direct stares to reduce pressure. And if something awkward happens, someone bumps into someone else, a drink spills, a moment gets tense, Canadians instinctively use humor to dissolve the discomfort. Not loud humor, not sharp humor. A small laugh, a shrug, a quiet, "Well, that's one way to start the day." It's not that Canadians are afraid of conflict. It's that they prefer to prevent conflict long before it begins. They manage the emotional atmosphere of a conversation with such skill and subtlety that most people don't even realize it's happening. But they feel it. They feel how safe it is to speak, how easy it is to be heard, how gentle the interaction remains. It's communication without pressure, connection without intensity. And it is one of the quietest things Canadians do that most people never notice. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that Canadians have a remarkable ability to help others without announcing it, without expecting anything, and without turning it into a grand moment. Their acts of kindness are so subtle and so woven into everyday behavior that many people don't even recognize them as kindness. They simply see them as the way things are done. A Canadian doesn't wait for someone to ask for help. They step in before the moment becomes difficult. If an elderly person is approaching a door, a Canadian will quietly hold it and stand back, giving them time and space. If a stranger drops a glove, someone will pick it up and return it with a small, friendly nod. No speech, no praise, no fuss. If a newcomer looks confused at a train station, someone will gently point them in the right direction, then disappear without waiting for thanks. During winter, this kindness becomes even more visible, though Canadians themselves barely notice. Someone clears not only their sidewalk, but the neighbors too. People dig out cars that aren't even theirs simply because they saw someone struggling. Drivers stop far in advance of crosswalks to make sure pedestrians feel safe crossing. Even in small everyday situations, like forming a line, ordering food, or entering a store, Canadians instinctively step aside, gesture, "go ahead," or adjust themselves to make someone else's experience easier. There's no spotlight on these behaviors, no "look what I just did," no expectation of applause. Canadians help in a way that feels effortless, natural, and almost invisible, because they don't label it as helping. To them, it's simply being part of a community. It's what you do when you see someone who might need a moment of support, whether they ask or not. And the remarkable thing is this: most people don't notice Canadians helping. They only notice how comfortable, safe, and supported they feel, without ever realizing why. There is a quiet expectation in Canada that you should never make life harder for the people around you. This rule is not taught in schools, not written in any guidebook, and not spoken out loud, yet it shapes everyday behavior in every city, town, and neighborhood. Canadians instinctively adjust their actions to keep things running smoothly. They don't block walkways, they don't crowd entrances, and they don't rush ahead of people who clearly need more time. At restaurants, they tidy their plates before leaving. At grocery stores, they slide their cart aside to avoid slowing anyone down. Even in public transit, Canadians shift their stance, angle their bag, or step aside with subtle precision so the space feels organized rather than chaotic. This little discipline creates an environment where things just work. No pushing, no frustration, no unnecessary tension. It's a cultural reflex. Don't create problems. Don't increase pressure. Don't be the reason someone else's day becomes more difficult. Most people never notice these small adjustments. They only notice how smooth and peaceful Canadian daily life feels. But the truth is that peacefulness doesn't come from rules. It comes from millions of small decisions made quietly, every single day. Canadians don't brag about their connection to nature. They simply live it in silence. They don't need dramatic mountain shots or viral travel videos to remind themselves of the outdoors. It's already part of their bloodstream. Even in the busiest cities, Canadians pause for a moment when the sky turns pink during sunset. They notice when the air smells like fresh rain. They walk more, even in winter, because the outdoors is never something they avoid. It's something they respect. Trails are protected, lakesides are treated with care, and parks are quiet places for reflection, not playgrounds for chaos. When snow falls, Canadians don't complain in loud frustration. They adapt. When the seasons change, they acknowledge it with a kind of calm acceptance. Even their humor about the weather shows a deep familiarity with nature's power. You'll hear them say, "dress in layers." "It's not that bad," or "could be worse." Not because they're dismissing the cold, but because they've learned how to live with it. Americans visiting Canada often feel this quiet bond without fully understanding it. They find themselves slowing down during a walk, admiring a frozen lake, or breathing deeper in the crisp air, because Canada's relationship with nature is so subtle, yet so present, that you start absorbing it without noticing. It's a calmness that comes from living in a place where the landscape shapes the culture, not the other way around. The most revealing part about these quiet Canadian habits is that you only begin to see them once you slow down. Canada's culture doesn't announce itself. It doesn't try to impress you. It doesn't perform. Instead, it reveals itself gently, through the way people move, the way they speak, the way they give space, the way they help, and the way they respect the world around them. These habits don't seem important at first, but over time they shape the entire emotional atmosphere of the country. They create cities that feel calm, communities that feel welcoming, and daily routines that feel lighter than what many people are used to. And once you start noticing these quiet behaviors, you realize something surprising. Canada's identity isn't built on loud symbols or bold statements. It's built on the subtle choices people make every day. Choices that never demand attention, but completely transform the way a place feels. That's what makes these habits powerful. They're invisible until they're not. And once you see them, you can never unsee them.